Hey everybody, welcome to Compliance Coffee Talk. I'm John Rote. I run the community and marketing team here at Evident, and I'm joined by Brian, who's one of the other guys on the Evident team. He focuses on the public sector and education, and also our two experts today, Tamika Puckett and Andrew Clearwater. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a second, but first, just the topic we have today about all of these questions we get around cyber liability, tech liability. This really got prompted by a webinar we had a couple of months ago that Tamika was also on. And afterwards, we went through the Q&A and we had so many questions that were related to tech, that were related to cyber liability, that were related to how to handle shifting AI threats. And once we heard those, we've started really having our antennas dialed in to how often we're hearing more of those questions. So we wanted to have this session today where we could really focus on a lot of those questions that we've been hearing from customers at meetings and at events. So let's go ahead and hop into it. But before we do, if you have any questions that come up at any time during the session, feel free to go ahead and leave them in the Q&A. It's kind of at the bottom of your screen in the middle. It's got the question mark icon, not the chat icon. You could also leave it through chat, but it's a little bit easier if we can track it through Q&A. And feel free to ask those at any time. We'll keep our eyes on it, and we'll either fit them in as the conversation proceeds, or we'll circle up and get to them at the end. So without further ado, welcome to Tamika and Andrew. Would love for you guys just to introduce yourselves really quickly. Tamika, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamika Puckett. I'm a 25 plus year career public entity risk manager. I served as chief risk officer for the city of Atlanta, city of Chicago, and also did a stint in the private sector as a head of cyber risk for Zoom video communications. I switched over to the insurance brokerage and risk consulting side a few years ago and currently serve as the national public sector practice leader at Protecdiv.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
Andrew, why don't we pass it over to you?
Sure. I'm Andrew Clearwater. I'm a lawyer at Dentons, a partner in the privacy and cybersecurity group. We're the largest law firm in the world, 12,000 plus lawyers and 200 locations, 80 countries. And yeah, my background it started in tech, worked in server rooms, research computing groups, moved to data policy group. I'm a lawyer. I have an LLM in global law and technology. I worked at Harvard's Berkman Center, the Future of Privacy Forum, some of these kind of tech policy focused areas. And then I moved in-house and did some kind of hybrid work for a healthcare big data company, and then for a vendor in the space that focuses on privacy and security and AI. So now I'm putting all those things together to try to counsel clients in this space, and I'm glad to be invited to the party today.
Great, we're happy to have you. We could not have a better duo of experts today in terms of the different levels and angles of experience they can bring to this. So really excited for the conversation. Would love just to get started around getting both of you to weigh in on like what feels most relevant for people to know today and to keep their eye on in terms of like whether it's a cyber or a technology or an AI related risk, like what is the actually practically most likely thing to cause disruptions for your organization right now? Everybody knows that the threats are growing and that it's increasingly becoming an important area, but it's sometimes hard knowing where to focus. Um, who wants to go first?
I'll take it. I've got a kind of a short list of 6 that I can go through pretty quickly and give you an idea. I mean, I can't help but I think start with the AI-driven cyber attacks. Basically, it's a great tool for productivity for all of us, and that includes the people who want to attack our systems. So it scales up phishing, social engineering, malware creation in a way that allows for high levels of personalization, and you can spot these issues coming in, but just given the volume and the personalization, it becomes quite difficult to manage. I think we've seen, as a second item, ransomware evolve. There's a real risk of data theft, public shaming, direct attacks on customers and partners, and you need to be able to manage that from both a technical and administrative point of view. Supply chain and third-party risk, I think, has a good area of focus amongst at least your third-party vendors, if not your own systems, to look through and look for how things are going to be notified, how you're going to find these unexpected behaviors. Um, I think it's important to focus on cloud misconfiguration. That ability for misconfigured storage or access controls or APIs to lead to real problems. And you know, next I would say insider threats. Any disgruntled employee with or a compromised account can lead to some unusually bad results. And finally, the area that I spend probably the most time in is regulatory and compliance risk. Just the volume, and I think we'll speak to this in some of the other parts of the presentation, just the volume of change that comes up in sort of the privacy and AI and cybersecurity regulation space means that even a success at the beginning of the year in terms of bringing all of your programs up to a certain level doesn't mean that by the end of the year you're really in good shape. So keeping up with those gaps in compliance, both in documentation, training, audits, all sorts of inquiries, can be a real challenge.
Great. Tamika, what about you? What jumps out to you as the most relevant thing to know about
I'll
right
tell you, yeah, Andrew hit the big
now?
ones. There's one on my list that he didn't get,
Go for it.
and it's from the public sector perspective, so you may not have this. I would have it, right? It's aging infrastructure, old computers and computer systems that plague public entities, which are always budget constrained, right? So there are a lot of competing priorities on the public entity side. And there's funding, limited funding left to maintain or even upgrade end-of-life hardware and software. Oftentimes, that funding is reprioritized for more immediate needs. I always use the comparison. It can literally be the choice between filling potholes or getting new computers. So obviously, that challenge leads to vulnerabilities in the systems that threat actors continue to use to exploit the systems, resulting in things like ransomware attacks and other breaches.
Tamika, I'm so glad you said that because, dealing with the public sector, especially in California, a lot of the public entities, it's a manual process right now, especially for, compliance, cyber, really a lot of that happening. So that's a great point you brought up. And the aging software, the aging evolution of everything needs to change. And that's a great point there.
Yeah, we often hear from people like it's especially hard knowing where to prioritize when you feel like you're playing catch up. Like you hear from people, oh, you've got to do all 8 of these things, but you can't do all 8 at one time. So just knowing where to focus is hard. But one of the questions that we got actually last month when we were talking about insurance requirements was just understanding the differences between the different types of insurance coverage that sort of touch on this area, whether it's cyber liability, technology errors and omissions. Just what is the difference between those main types, and how do you understand what's relevant to your organization and what maybe isn't? To me,
Okay.
you want to go with this one?
Yeah, I'd love to take that one. There are definitely, 2 different types of coverage. You have the cyber insurance, which protects against financial losses from incidents, and then you have technology E&O, which is an E&O, like a professional liability policy. So going into a little more specifics, the cyber policy protects against financial losses that result from cyber incidents, such as ransomware attacks. I always say that one because that was my experience as a risk manager. And for this policy, the exposure is data, right? So sensitive or protected data that can include both customer and employee information. The cyber policy will provide coverage for the insured, as well as any affected third party. So that's a unique situation with insurance, is that it provides both first and third party coverage. And I would say that any entity that collects, stores, and or transports any sensitive data should carry cyber coverage. With respects to technology E&O, again, it's a professional liability coverage. So it provides coverage for professional services, professional service providers and their services, and any negligence or mistakes or failures while providing those services or products that can lead to financial losses to the user or the client in that case.
Got it. And do those does that coverage or endorsements onto that type of coverage, does that cover some of the AI related risks that you mentioned earlier, Andrew, or does that need to be an entirely different part of your risk management program?
Well, so the AI overlap here, it it is something that should probably be separately handled. I mean, one of the things to consider is if you add on to an existing policy, you're probably not going to get comprehensive coverage. You're probably addressing a specific issue, which is good. You know, in terms of affordability, and Tamika can speak to this better than me, you can probably get to some specific issues that you think you will face. That said, when you get to a policy that's dedicated, I think you're going to see something that's going to address far more of the issues that are relevant for AI, and we could go into a couple examples in a bit. But I think it's going to come down to managing what level of risk and exposure you have as an organization to some of these AI risks. And I think everyone's using some amount of tools, but the sensitivity of that usage is what you need to pay attention to. So if you think about, you know, the data sensitivity, the system criticality, the level of access, you know, the types of projects you're using it on, maybe the service type, or, you know, if there's some sort of mandate, whether it's, you know, through a relationship or a contract that says, hey, you've got to have this type of coverage, that's going to really determine, I think, what kind of coverage you go with.
Got it. So I guess when you're thinking about your own situation and also the coverages that you might require of vendors or other contractors that you hire, how should you weigh all of these different factors in terms of deciding what's the right balance between coverages that are reasonable and practical versus over the top and will result in people being increasingly resistant to your requirements? Yeah, how do you strike the right balance on knowing like what level of protection and what level of coverages is right for you? Tamika, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. The level of coverage, you know, for some insurance policies, amount of coverage is typically correlated with the amount of the contract value, which usually equates to exposure. In the case of cyber, the contract value does not always equate to the level of exposure. And so I think that is the key. You know, when you can have a small services or SaaS provider, software as a service provider, you can have a contract that's worth $10,000, but they're, as far as the what they're charging for use of that product, but they're accessing or you're inputting, you know, PHI into that system. And if those records, and it, depending on the number of records, are exposed, the exposure financially can be way more than $10,000, way more than $1 million. And so you have to really assess the level of exposure with respects to the number of records and the level of access that is going to be had for that product or service.
Got it. Andrew, what about you? How do you assess which factors are the ones that are the most important to focus on and think about ensuring you have coverage for?
No, I don't think I'd change anything to that list. That was a good one.
Great.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So the follow-up to this is like, and this is a question that we hear a lot, is that vendors are increasingly hesitant anytime that we increase requirements. Like we hear from everybody, you need to regularly review your requirements. Oftentimes you find a lot of places that you need to increase the level of requirements, but then from a practical sense, you talk to your vendors and your suppliers, and there's just a lot of resistance. How do you approach that resistance and think through, one, just how to communicate and be a good partner with your suppliers and vendors, and two, what is it you need to explain to them to kind of get you know, to get alignment with them? Tamika, I feel like you've probably dealt with this one a lot, you know, all flavors of vendor pushback. You want to start for us?
For sure. As a former public entity risk manager, I certainly understand getting pushback from the vendor, and not only the vendor, but even more so internally with the user departments who absolutely want or need the service. So their vendors are telling them, I can't get the coverage. or I can't afford it, or we don't need it. And so I'm fighting not only the vendor and what they're telling the user department, but also the user agency. It's the job of the risk manager to articulate the risk associated with not having the coverage in place, right? So when I face this challenge, I cite examples of potential outcomes, and we have a myriad of examples in the media, in the news to reference. And if I need something more substantive, I would call my broker to get assistance and additional support in helping to further articulate, the need for support there. Also, when I felt really strongly about a matter, I would escalate it internally to seniors. So the CFO, the city attorney, the chief procurement officer, get those folks on your side and helping them understand what the risks are associated with not having the coverage. At the end of the day, it's a business decision. And it ultimately can be left, depending on your entity, can be left up with the department or the user agency that is procuring the service. In those cases, document your recommendation in writing, send copies to those seniors that you've engaged, the CFO, the CLO, the CPO. And then, as you can imagine, when the user agencies start to receive those emails, they continue, they in the future, they are more compliant with kind of supporting you with the fight against the vendor to make sure that they're properly covered for the risk that they're associated with.
The way I heard someone say it in a session a few weeks ago was like, it's not my job to convince everybody that they have to agree with me.
Right.
They can disagree all they want, but they need to disagree from an informed place. So
Right.
Yeah.
I don't mind if they disagree as long as they know where we're all coming from.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Tamika, you could have said that any better. Even on my side, my end of negotiating these contracts with the public entities, and I know that from a broker side is, I was actually going to hit on what you just said there and bring Andrew in here because from a legal side, Andrew, can you explain kind of what's too much to ask for or what's too little to ask for when negotiating those limits where, you might have a vendor saying, I can't perform those limits or I can't increase those limits to that level.
Yeah.
Where's that pushback come from a legal side where, because I know I deal with it with our legal team as well of you need this, like, well, the contract isn't only worth this much money, but we're not going to leave ourselves liable for this much. But from a public sector side of things, when does that pushback really come into play for you?
Yeah. It would be nice, there's two levels to this. There's communicating the necessity, and then there's sort of prioritizing, right? You don't want to hit everyone with everything.
Right.
There are, the battles to be fought and battles to be delayed or phased or, facilitated later on. So know when it's kind of worth to dive into these things. And I think if you know where your high risk vendors are and your medium, and where your, kind of key issues are and the ones that you're gonna kind of leave for, it's okay if we don't win on this one within the playbook. That's important, so that everyone isn't always feeling like the stakes are impossibly high. I think the difficulty here is that a lot of the requirements are really industry best practices as opposed to emerging regulatory expectations in most cases. I mean, there are some limits sometimes, but I feel like a lot of it comes, and this is why there's so much difficulty in arriving at an amount or a multiple, is because there isn't a requirement many of the times to get to something, but there is an expectation maybe on the one of the party sides to say, look, I think every time we get 2x, so I want 2x, but the problem, of course, that you might be facing is the one that Tamika's already raised, which is like, great, maybe the risk that you're facing here in this situation is not related to the value of the contract. And so what you might have to do something as a company to kind of realize the risk protections that you need to have there, because the value of this deal is just not going to be high enough that you're going to get the amount of protection that you want through the contract.
And Andrew, do you have a sense for where it makes sense to be patient and wait for regulations to clarify what approaches we need to take and what requirements might need to be versus where we need to be really proactive and not wait for that?
Well, I mean, I guess this comes down to what sorts of risks you're facing as an organization. So we could take this, a lot of my risk that I focus on is data centric. And so if I think about this in the sense of, kind of practical approaches to, privacy data, and I think about the kinds of things I would look to, I would often say, well, yes, there are many state comprehensive laws and there's have more on the way, but maybe the best way to protect against this risk is not to kind of focus on what the law requires, but to have a comprehensive program in place. And so part of the advice that I give to clients is what sorts of standards are out there, how would they fit in terms of mitigating the risk, and then that allows them to sort of move forward in a multi-tiered approach, one that's kind of stabilized by like, here's the program built around a standard, and then let's map the requirements to that rather than sort of zigging and zagging based on law developing a lot in one year and not very much in another.
Got it. So I guess a little bit related to that is like, this area seems to be in flux so much. Tamika, what advice do you have just in terms of like how frequently organizations should be updating their requirements and really assessing, where they're at? Is it do you have to do it constantly? Is doing it annually enough? How would you think about that?
Well, I think that you certainly are going to do it annually. You're going to do it annually when you're renewing your policies, right? Your insurance policies. You want to take a look at what you have, what's available, and what has happened over the last 12 months. Are there any new emerging things that have occurred? Excuse me. I also, in mentioning that, would recommend that when a new incident does occur, that you also take a look at your policy at that point, because you might want to make some midterm changes, if at all possible, depending on what the incident was. So certainly annually, and then post major incident that's newsworthy for certain.
That makes sense. We've started having a couple questions come in. All those out there, if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. The first one we got is about privacy and just understanding, just trying to disambiguate all of these different terms that we hear between ISO, SOC 2, NIST, what to pay attention to, what to know about the ones that are of the most practical relevance versus the
Yeah.
ones that maybe aren't quite as key as the ones maybe anyway the main ones to focus on. Andrew, I think you know where I'm going with this one. Why don't you
Yeah.
jump in here?
Yeah, and sometimes the answer is multiple of these are useful, but it is important to know why you're using it and how. So, ISO, the I stands for international. So this really is something that you typically will see when there's, a global market for something, especially software, broad security, coverage, and there's an ability to get certified. So you'll see something like ISO 27001. That's in more than 60,000 organizations that's certified to that. When you see that, you've got a sense for a level of governance maturity on behalf of the organization that put it together, that they're able to manage year over year continuous improvement in their program, and they know where their risks are. Notice I didn't say they have no breaches and everything's perfect, right? That is not what that is showing you. Now, a SOC 2 is a little different. It's not a certification, it's an attestation report. It's a focus area usually on particular service or deliverable. And you should definitely ask for the report if you're using this to evaluate an organization. Because that's where all the value is. It's not the kind of thing where just having it is the value. It's the ability to kind of go in and see, were there any major deviations from the program that need to be looked at. And then NIST, because we're talking to a group here that probably has some public sector overlap. This is very U.S. centric. Critical infrastructure often uses this. It's a great framework with a lot of different types of controls, but it's not one that you can certify to. So sometimes the best approach really is for private sector. They will usually use the SOC 2 as a report to kind of explain and they'll use the ISO as a way to show, a compatible governance system that people can, easily describe and understand. And it's NIST that they're going to for the whole series of controls, and that's highly valuable and very compatible, but it's difficult to communicate. You're going to have to communicate that through assessment, or you're going to have to communicate that through, interview or, discussion with the security team. It's not as easy to transact in.
Got it. That makes sense. Next one that we had come in says, I'm not deeply technical either as a lawyer or an IT professional. What advice do you have for how to engage with lawyers and with IT on these technical matters that might be a little bit over my head? So, I think a lot of us hear that. You hear the word cyber and you immediately say, like, that's not me, talk to the IT department. Um, why don't you both answer this one since you come at it from different directions? Tamika, do you want to start us off there?
Can, having been in that situation before, um, it's a risk. So you break it down like you would any other risk to your property, risk to, your employees. You look at it from a basic risk management standpoint. Um, and that's when you start to have a full understanding of where your exposures are and what your exposures are. We understand that data is the exposure.
Mhm.
So what are the things that people can do to access that exposure unauthorized and cause me a problem? And so when you take a look at it from that perspective, you get out of the high level technical aspect of things and you just see it. I mean, you could even compare it to your car insurance, right? I mean, insurance is insurance. Where do I have coverage? Where do I not have coverage? Where do I need extra coverage? Are there exclusions on my policy? Are there things that I need to have added? So that from the insurance standpoint, but then in having those same conversations with the chief legal officer or the CIO or CTO, using that plain language so that you have a full understanding. Oftentimes they don't necessarily, at least historically, more so now than before, they didn't necessarily understand risk management and
Mhm.
risk assessment, right? In the formal sense of it all. Now those elements have been ingrained into cybersecurity, and so there's some commonalities there. So when you just take a look at it from the basic risk management perspective, I think that makes it easier to have that conversation.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I think that's totally correct. I mean, start simple. There's plenty of things that lawyers are good at, and that's putting, categories and organization to things. But they probably don't know a lot of the things that you're bringing to them. So both of you are coming together, sharing knowledge. It's not, any sort of deficit that you're starting from. So, evaluate the risk together. What's impacted, how, and what could go wrong. And these are all basic ideas that you completely understand.
Mhm.
And it's through that conversation that you'll be able to get to where you need to go. You don't need to know all the lingo in order to be successful there.
Definitely.
Okay. Next one we've got, and if we've got time for a couple more, if people have any others they want to drop it in the chat, is around AI and just how to navigate what's hype versus what's reality. I think we all, no one can go a day without hearing something about AI in the news. As a practical risk manager, how do you assess what's worth actually paying attention to versus what is just kind of part of the hype cycle? Andrew, do you want to go for this one?
Sure. I mean, I guess as it relates to risk, we're still grounded in a few things. We can look, is it going to be a sensitive use? Is it going to be a restricted use? Does it have some sort of complexity that will make it difficult to understand from a point of view of transparency or decision making? And so from that point of view, just sort of honestly approach it and try to understand what's technically happening. I mean, from the point of view of just trying to understand if everything is fake that you're hearing, I guess, move to see live demos, ask questions, get periods of time to trial things, and make sure that you're not using real data while you're doing that.
Got it. Tamika, what about you? Anything to add in terms of where to pay attention to the AI related topics versus where maybe not to pay as much attention?
I think we pay attention to it all and use what becomes relevant to you and your organization. Um, it's changing literally as we speak, right? So as soon as we think we have understanding of one element of AI, there's something new that completely, null and voids what we thought we knew. So we're always playing catch up, and in a constant state of reaction with respects to AI. So I think that we look at it all and evaluate what might be relevant. And try to keep up as much as possible. This is, cyber itself isn't an emerging risk. AI, I think I can't see where it's not going to always be an emerging risk, right? So something
I
we
think
just
the
have to
area
constantly
to
keep our eyes on.
really be
I'm sorry.
careful about is where you lose that kind of human in the loop. A lot of our controls that we think about is, and then someone will use their discretion to decide if, we move forward.
Yeah.
And if there are, tools that you're considering using, this sort of agentic future where you just set something on a path and let it go, that is the most risky area, and the time to evaluate those tools should be, longer than any of the other ones you might be looking at.
That makes sense. Let's see. I know we're at the bottom of the hour. Brian, anything that you have for us to wrap up, or did we get through all of the questions today? I have another tab open with all the questions left over from last time, and it looks like we got through a lot of them.
Yeah. No, I think this is great. I mean, Tamika, Andrew, I mean, fabulous questions from the audience. But I mean, even better answers. I mean, I learned a lot from this, and I think you guys did a great job.
Great. Tamika, Andrew, anything and any guiding wisdom and parting, or any parting wisdom as we wrap up?
Stay diligent. Um, Cyber is going to continue to be evolving. And so we just have to stay diligent and try to keep ahead of a curve as much as we can.
Yeah, I like that. Just keep learning. I think that's the thing. In order to figure this all out, you got to be flexible and you got to be open to it.
Great. Sounds good. Well, everybody, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. We've got another session teed up for next month. If you have any questions that occur to you 5 minutes after you hang up, just shoot us an email and we'll try to get them answered. And if you have any thoughts about future topics, shoot us a note and we'll try to make sure that we keep these sessions as practical and productive and helpful for everybody in the community. And until then, we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everybody.